My sister fired me the same week she became CEO of our family business. No warning. No conversation. Just a smile across the boardroom table and the words, "Your services are no longer required. Clear your office by tomorrow." This was during a board meeting I helped schedule. A meeting I prepared. A room full of people who knew exactly how much of the company I'd built behind the scenes. I nodded. I thanked her. And I couldn't stop laughing. Because what she didn't know was that her promotion came with conditions she never bothered to read. That my name wasn't just on an employee contract. And that by the time she woke up the next morning, the power she thought she had would already be gone. She thought firing me was the end. For me, it was the beginning. The room went quiet after she said it. Not the polite kind of quiet where people shuffle papers or clear their throats. The heavy kind. The kind that sits in the air, because no one wants to be the next one noticed. My sister didn't look at me when she finished speaking. She straightened a folder in front of her. Already moving on. Already acting like I was part of the past. The title beside her name on the screen behind the table still looked new. CEO. Fresh ink. Fresh power. She wore it like armor. I nodded once. Slow. Deliberate. The way you do when you've already decided not to argue. I even thanked her. A couple of board members shifted in their seats when I did. They were expecting resistance. A scene. Something uncomfortable they could pretend not to see later. Instead, I smiled. And then I laughed. Not loudly. Not enough to disrupt the meeting. Just enough for the people closest to me to hear it. The sound of someone realizing a game has finally reached the interesting part. My sister's eyes flicked up for half a second. Confusion. Then irritation. She thought the laugh was nerves. Or denial. That's what people assume when they underestimate you. They think calm is weakness. She reminded me, firmly, that I had until the end of the next day to clear my office. Security would be notified. Access would be updated. Her tone carried a little extra edge on that last part. Like she enjoyed saying it. Like she'd been waiting. I wrote it down in my notebook. Not because I needed to remember, but because I wanted her to see me doing it. I wanted her to think I was accepting the terms she believed she controlled. The meeting moved on. Forecasts. Rebrands. Strategic vision. I listened with half an ear. Every slide that went up was something I'd touched at some point. Systems I helped design. Clients I'd smoothed over when she'd burned bridges. Growth that didn't exist until I made it exist. No one mentioned my name again. When the meeting finally adjourned, people avoided my eyes. A few offered stiff nods. One director hesitated, like he wanted to say something, then thought better of it. That told me enough. They all knew. They just didn't want to be caught knowing. I walked back to my office alone. Same hallway I'd walked for years. Same framed mission statements on the wall. Same glass doors with my name still printed on them. For now, I unlocked it, stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The office looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. Clean desk. Neatly stacked files. The kind of order that comes from knowing where everything is, because you built it that way. I sat down and looked around, taking my time. Not mourning it. Cataloging it. I didn't start packing right away. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up a folder I hadn't touched in months. Not hidden, just ignored. The kind of thing people stop seeing when they assume you're harmless. Agreements, addendums, old emails. The boring parts of a business that everyone skims because they're too busy chasing titles. I smiled again. She thought firing me was a statement. A show of authority in front of a room full of people. What she didn't realize was that she'd just handed me a deadline. And deadlines have always been my strength. I stayed in that chair long after the building started to empty. The lights outside my office dimmed as people logged off for the day. Confident the drama was over. I let them think that. I let my sister think that too. When I finally stood, I didn't grab a box. I didn't touch my desk. I locked the door and walked down to the parking garage instead. I needed air, distance and time to think without walls closing in. Sitting in my car, I replayed the meeting frame by frame. Not emotionally. Strategically. The wording she used. The timing. The fact that she'd chosen to do it in front of the board instead of privately. That wasn't impulse. That was theater. She wanted witnesses. She wanted dominance on record. Which meant she hadn't read everything. I drove home and slept better than I had in weeks. Early the next morning, before anyone else was in the building, I was back at my desk. Badge still worked. Systems still open. No rush. No panic. I brewed coffee and opened the folder again. This time with clearer eyes. There it was. The clause everyone had glossed over years ago when the company restructured. Buried under legal language, no one bothered to question because it didn't affect their paychecks. It affected control. Termination triggered review. Review triggered disclosure. Disclosure triggered authority, shifting back to original contributors until the review closed. Contributors like me. Contributors whose names were still attached to infrastructure, licensing, and client relationships no one else could legally touch without consent. I hadn't insisted on it back then. I didn't need to. I'd watched my sister skim the paperwork, eager for the title, impatient with details. I remembered the exact moment she signed. I closed my laptop and finally stood to pack. Not in a hurry, not angry, just methodical. I took personal items first. Then I cleared my desk completely. No dramatics, no photos left behind. As I wheeled the box toward the elevator, a few early employees stared. One of them opened their mouth to speak. I shook my head slightly. Not yet. By the time I reached the lobby, my phone buzzed. A message from our legal department. Can you come upstairs? There's been a complication. I smiled to myself. Next morning was already starting to deliver. I didn't answer the message right away. I finished loading the box into my car first. I wanted the image complete. Fired executive, quietly leaving. No resistance. Appearances matter, especially when people are about to panic. Then I replied with a single word. Sure. When I walked back into the building, the mood had shifted. Conversations stopped when I passed. People avoided eye contact, then pretended not to. Whatever complication they'd uncovered was already moving through the company faster than any official announcement. Legal was waiting in a small conference room on the executive floor. 2 attorneys. 1 binder. 1 tablet open to a document they clearly hadn't expected to revisit. My sister wasn't there yet. They asked me to sit. They spoke carefully. Too carefully. The kind of tone professionals use when they're trying to confirm whether a situation is as bad as it looks. They told me that my termination had triggered an automatic governance review. That certain operational controls were now frozen. That some contracts could not be executed without my sign-off until the review was resolved. I let them finish. Then I asked a simple question. How long does the review usually take? One of them glanced at the other before answering. 30 to 60 days. Sometimes longer. I nodded. Like that was just a scheduling detail. That's when my sister walked in. She looked confident at first. Irritated, but composed. She took her seat at the head of the table out of habit. No one stopped her. Not yet. She launched straight into it. Said there had been a misunderstanding. That HR had escalated something unnecessarily. That we could smooth this over, if I'd just cooperate. I asked her what she meant by cooperate. She said she needed me to sign a temporary waiver. Just a formality, she said. Something to keep operations moving while things settled. I asked if she'd read the clause that triggered the review. Her silence answered for her. The lawyers shifted. One of them slid the binder closer to her, open to a highlighted page. I watched her eyes move across the text, slowly at first. Then faster. Then back again. She looked up at me. This time without the smirk. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands. You told me to clear my office by tomorrow, I said calmly. So I did. But you didn't say anything about clearing my authority. The room went very quiet. No one spoke for a moment. The kind of silence where even breathing feels loud. My sister broke it first, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. This is ridiculous, she said. You're reading this wrong. One of the attorneys cleared his throat. Not loudly. Not confidently. Just enough to signal that this wasn't a debate anymore. He explained, slowly, that the language was clear. Termination of a founding operational contributor triggered a mandatory pause. Certain systems, contracts, and approvals could not move forward without my consent until the review concluded. My sister's jaw tightened. She asked why no one had mentioned this before. The other attorney answered her honestly. Because no one thought it would ever apply. The clause existed to protect the company from rash decisions, from power grabs, from exactly this kind of scenario. She turned back to me, eyes sharp now. So what? You think this gives you leverage? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. It gives the company protection, I said. Leverage is what happens when someone ignores the fine print. She tried a different approach. Said we were family. Said this didn't have to get ugly. That we could fix it quietly if I'd just undo the termination and let things return to normal. Normal. The word hung there, hollow. I asked if undoing the termination meant reinstating my role with the same authority I had before. Same access. Same reporting structure. Same respect. She didn't answer right away. One of the lawyers shifted again and said, carefully, that reinstatement would indeed cancel the review. That it would restore operations immediately. He didn't look at my sister when he said it. He looked at me. I could feel her frustration building. She had expected panic, begging, negotiation. Instead, she was sitting across from someone who was already past that. She leaned forward. You can't seriously be enjoying this. I smiled, just a little. You fired me in front of the board. I said. This is just paperwork catching up. She pushed back her chair and stood. Pacing now. She accused me of planning this. Of waiting for her to make a mistake. Of undermining her authority on day one. I didn't deny it. I didn't confirm it either. What happens, she asked the lawyers, if she refuses to cooperate? They exchanged a look that said they'd hoped not to answer that out loud. The company stalled. Deals paused. Vendors waited. Certain clients required approvals only I could legally provide under the current structure. Every delay created questions. Every question created pressure. Not on me. On her. She stopped pacing and looked at me again. This time without anger. With calculation. What do you want? She asked. I took a breath. Not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to choose the words carefully. I want exactly what you told me yesterday, I said. Clarity. I explained that I wasn't interested in her title. I didn't want her chair. I didn't want to humiliate her publicly the way she'd tried to humiliate me. What I wanted was acknowledgement. On record, in writing. That my role had been essential. That my termination had been premature. And that any future decisions affecting me would require my consent. The lawyers listened, took notes, asked follow-up questions, treated my terms like a serious proposal. Because they were. My sister sank back into her chair. She had walked into that meeting thinking she was managing a complication. She was just beginning to understand she was negotiating from the weaker position. And the day had barely started. The negotiations dragged into the afternoon, not because the terms were unclear, but because my sister needed time to accept that the balance of power had shifted and there was no shortcut back to where she thought she stood. At one point, she asked for a private conversation. The lawyers stepped out, closing the door behind them. The room felt smaller without witnesses. She dropped the CEO voice immediately. You're really going to do this? She asked. After everything? I asked her what she meant by everything. She talked about pressure, about expectations, about how the board needed a clean break to believe in her leadership. She said firing me was supposed to be symbolic, a signal that she was in charge now. I let her talk. Then I said the one thing she wasn't prepared for. You didn't fire me to lead, I said. You fired me to be seen leading. That landed harder than anything else I'd said all day. I reminded her of the nights I stayed late, fixing problems she never even knew existed. The clients I kept when they were ready to walk. The systems I built so thoroughly that no one bothered to learn how they worked because they just ran. I told her she didn't inherit a business. She inherited something maintained. She bristled. Said I was being dramatic. I slid the printed agreement across the table. Highlighted. Annotated. Calm. This, I said, is why the company is quiet right now. Not because I'm spiteful. Because I was careful. She stared at the pages. For the first time since the board meeting, she looked unsure. Not angry. Not arrogant. Just uncertain. When the lawyers came back in, the tone shifted again. Less posturing. More problem-solving. They drafted a framework. Temporary reinstatement with expanded authority during the review. Public acknowledgement to the board that my termination had been procedurally flawed. A revised governance structure that required joint approval on strategic decisions. My sister objected to parts of it. Loudly at first. Then less so. Each objection was met with a quiet explanation of risk, exposure, and precedent. She started losing energy as the afternoon wore on. By early evening, she signed. Not happily. Not proudly. But clearly. When she handed the pen back, she didn't look at me. She gathered her things and left without a word. The lawyers stayed behind to finalize documents. One of them glanced at me and said, almost apologetically, "You handled that well." I thanked him and stood. As I walked out of the building, I passed the same lobby where I'd carried a box that morning. The security guard nodded at me. Respectfully this time. Next morning was still coming, and it was going to be even more interesting. The next morning, I arrived earlier than usual, not because I was eager, but because I wanted the building quiet. Empty hallways tell you more about a company than crowded ones ever will. My access badge worked again. Full permissions. No delays. No extra steps. That alone confirmed how quickly the paperwork had moved overnight. Someone had been up late fixing what should never have been broken. I went straight to my office. The nameplate was still gone, but the space felt different now. Not abandoned. Reclaimed. I set my bag down, opened the blinds, and let the city spill back in. By mid-morning, emails started rolling in. Polite ones. Careful ones. Executives asking for guidance. Managers checking in. Clients requesting confirmation that projects were still moving forward. None of them mentioned the firing. None of them needed to. The shift was obvious. The board convened an emergency session at noon. This time, my sister didn't sit at the head of the table. She took a seat to the side. Jaw tight. Hands folded like she was containing something sharp. The chair spoke first. He addressed the procedural oversight from the previous day and emphasized continuity, stability, and governance. Carefully chosen words. No blame. No drama. Then he acknowledged my role. Out loud. On record. He talked about the infrastructure I'd built, the relationships I maintained, the risk created by abrupt decisions. He thanked me for my continued commitment. I didn't respond beyond a nod. The acknowledgement wasn't for me. It was for the room. After the meeting, my sister stopped me in the hallway. No witnesses this time. No audience. You didn't have to go that far, she said. I looked at her. Calm. Steady. You didn't have to fire me in front of the board. She held my gaze for a moment, then looked away. The rest of the day passed quietly. Too quietly. The kind of quiet that comes when people are reassessing their assumptions. By evening, the company was moving again. Deals resumed. Calls returned. The machinery restarted as if it had never stalled. But everyone knew. Titles can be announced. Authority has to be recognized. And tomorrow, I was going to make sure that distinction was impossible to ignore. The real shift didn't happen in a meeting or an email. It happened slowly, in the way people changed how they spoke to me. Voices lowered. Questions asked instead of instructions given. Decisions paused until I weighed in. Authority doesn't need an announcement. It announces itself. By the end of that week, the company looked the same from the outside. Same logo. Same leadership page on the website. Same press release celebrating my sister's vision. But inside, everything moved differently. Nothing critical advanced without my signature. Every major decision crossed my desk. Not because I demanded it, but because everyone understood the risk of pretending I wasn't there. My sister tried to regain control quietly. She scheduled meetings without me, only to cancel them later. She floated ideas in side conversations that went nowhere because no one wanted to be associated with another misstep. Each attempt cost her a little more credibility. Then came the board dinner. It was meant to be a reset, a public show of unity. I almost declined, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see how she would play it. She arrived late, flanked by confidence she hadn't fully recovered. She spoke about growth, about innovation, about bold leadership. I listened, politely. When the conversation turned to operations, one of the board members turned to me and asked for my assessment. I answered calmly, clearly, honestly, not critical. Not flattering, just accurate. The table shifted. After dinner, the chair pulled me aside. He didn't mince words. He said the company couldn't afford instability, that whatever internal dynamics existed needed to resolve quickly. He asked whether I saw a future where this worked. I told him the truth, that the company would survive, that it always had, but leadership required more than authority. It required judgment, and judgment wasn't something you could vote into existence. The following Monday, the announcement went out. My role was formalized, expanded, public, not CEO, something quieter, more permanent, a position that didn't rotate with board moods or family politics, one that sat underneath everything else and kept it from collapsing. My sister wasn't removed, not officially, but her power was contained. She avoided me after that. When we did cross paths, there was no hostility left, just something like caution. She had learned the difference between firing someone and dismantling them, and how easily the two could be confused. A few weeks later, I cleared my office again. This time on my terms. I moved into a space with no glass walls, no title on the door, just access, influence, and quiet control. People still ask me if I regret not taking her job, if I should have gone all the way. I don't. She wanted a crown. I wanted the keys. And the morning she fired me, thinking she'd won, turned out to be the day she taught me exactly how much leverage silence can hold. That was the last time anyone told me my services were no longer required. Because from that day on, they made sure they were. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Stories like this aren't really about jobs or titles. They're about power, timing, and knowing when to stay quiet and let the truth surface on its own. I'm curious what you would have done. Would you have walked away for good after being fired like that? Should I have taken the CEO role when I had the chance? And do you think my sister learned anything from how this played out? If you enjoy stories where patience beats ego, subscribe and stay with me. There's a lot more coming, and you won't want to miss the next one.